And once again, welcome to the class, Fall 2012, A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator and Life as an Entrepreneur lecture series. This has been quite a semester. It was a certain realization today. We are nearing to the end of our semester, and we are already on to our 10th lecture. I had the chance to talk to some of you, and mostly heard great reviews about the class. If you have suggestions for making this class more awesome, please feel free to come by, drop by, talk to me after the class for the next year. To recap an important point, it is strongly recommended that if someone has to leave the class at 6, when the lecture or Q&A is in progress, you'll have to silently leave the class through the back door. And Craig and Ken is going to talk about it a little bit more. A quick teaser, Microsoft Surface was released last week, and Craig Mundie, the Chief Strategy Officer of Microsoft, is here. We have an incredibly distinguished speaker for our class this evening. So let me not block you from the fun part, and let me ask my colleague and friend, Ken Singer, the current director of CET and a perennial entrepreneur, to introduce our tonight's speaker. Ken.
All right, thank you. All right. And I went old school and got a notepad. He's using an iPad, which I think might not be the right thing to use today. All right. I want to introduce you guys to Craig Mundie. He's responsible for Microsoft's long-term technology strategy. And he has experience in various fields, including supercomputing, consumer electronics, education, healthcare, and robotics. So it's a wide range of things. He joined Microsoft many years ago. I'll let him elaborate how long ago it was, to create and run the consumer platform division, which develops non-PC platforms such as WinCE. Some of you guys aren't old enough to remember that platform, but a lot of logistics and UPS, they use that kind of technology. Handheld PC, Pocket PC, Auto PC, and was also part of Microsoft's digital TV effort, which I think you'll see some interesting threads today about. He also is an advisor to President Obama on technology issues, and is one of the best generalists I've met so far. So I'd like to introduce Craig Mundie today.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ken, and good afternoon to everybody. Let me just tell you what we're going to do in the next hour or so you understand the logistics, and then I'll get into the talk. I'm going to talk for probably 40 minutes or 45 minutes or so. And then we're going to actually, we have some door prizes that are probably worth hanging around to get. You have to be present to win. And so we're going to do that right after I talk, because I know the class technically is supposed to end around 6 or so. And so after we give out the door prizes, anybody who has to leave then or at any point after that is welcome to do so as required. But then I'm going to have a Q&A session with the whole audience. And then when the whole thing's over, I'll stick around for a while, and we'll have all the big toys here on the stage. And any of you that want to come down and talk or test drive any of this stuff, you'll be welcome to do that too. So we'll be here probably at least till 6:30 to do all those things. So let me start and talk about how things are evolving at Microsoft. A couple years ago, we introduced a new line of phones, and with those, we started to create a new model of a user interface. And so this week was a big week for the company in that we, yesterday in San Francisco, announced Windows Phone 8. And the significance of these devices is that we've been on a path at Microsoft to try to unify from an architectural point of view, not only at the low levels of the machine and operating system, but at a higher conceptual level, how people will interact with them. And so on these phones, we created these smart tile-based interfaces and have a lot of focus on customization. You can essentially organize the front of the phone any way you want. And then last week, of course, was a super big week. Not only did we introduce Windows 8, but we introduced Surface, which is the first time the company's actually designed and built a computer of its own. It has these pretty cool snap keyboards. And as you'll see in this environment, it has the same big sort of touch-first kind of interface. What's different about our approach to this compared to Apple, for example, or even some of the Android things, is that we've decided that it should be valuable to people to be able to have both a classical view of a PC environment for running things that aren't really touch-oriented, and to allow this same interface and operating system to scale from the very small, like the phone, all the way to the very big. And so we've done that, and we feel pretty good about that. So what I brought today was really the world's largest tablet. This is the 82-inch tablet. And there it is. And what it is it literally is an 82-inch tablet. So you know, everybody can talk about whether they got the 7-inch or the 9 or the 10. Well, I got the 82. What's interesting about this is this interface scales in a very nice way. You know, it's all touch-enabled. You can basically shrink these things to get, you know, to any environment you want. And the other thing that's interesting about this device, it's really kind of a first in the world, is this actually supports a pen, a high-resolution pen, as well as touch, and it does it with a common underlying technology. People have had touch devices, obviously, for a while. We've been building pen-enabled devices since 2000. But the real trick is to try to be able to do high-resolution pen and touch at 82 inches. It turns out it's a physics problem that's quite challenging. But in fact, you know, we've been able to do that pretty effectively. And so to give you an idea, just briefly, of you know, what some of these things are like, there's a lot of built-in capabilities now. So for example, we have a news reading feature that's all built in, and of course, you know, works the same way. Everything just scrolls with your finger. And every one of these things, in a sense, is like an active tile. You touch it, and you get to drill into the story. And so more and more of the things that Microsoft has built all have this attribute. The way that these interfaces work is they all essentially come in from the edges. And so if I want to go back to the start screen, I can hit that button. Another one, for example, let's see if I see it. Well, just weather, for example. One of the things that we wanted to do also was recognize that while the complexity, if you will, and value that was in the conventional multi-window interface, where windows could be any size and moved around and occluded, you know, what has been great for a desktop kind of environment. In a mobile environment, or one where you want to have a touch-first interface, the flexibility of that turns out to be a liability. And so in this model, we've actually come up with essentially two ways to think about applications and screens. You can just flick them out from the side, and they're all running underneath. And desktop applications would be exactly the same. If, for example, I'm reading the news and I decide I wanted to track the weather. Sorry, I did that wrong. This thing has essentially two windows. There's one that's a quarter of the screen and one that then becomes 3/4. And everything is designed to fit into these two modalities. So a minute ago you saw the weather app was essentially designed for the full screen experience. The way we've specified these, both the ones we've written and other people, you now have the ability to say each app has two modes, the little panel mode and the big panel mode. And they're both interactive. You can essentially just, you know, shift from one to the other by sliding the bar back and forth, and they'll both adjust. So here, the news would just now be converted into the list of little tiles that you can essentially scroll through and watch at the same time. And so, you know, we think that this is going to be quite interesting. And one of the areas where this is particularly appropriate now is we've just released the Skype app, both for the phone, the tablet, and the giant tablet. And you can put Skype, for example, in here as one of the little panel apps. So you have continuous connectivity, the ability to actually maintain a conversation with people and still operate all of the classical applications. So let me show you some other cool things that are being done now. As computers have gotten a lot more powerful, we have taken the interesting things that you wouldn't thought were particularly complicated and said, what does it mean to refresh them in this environment where you have touch and a lot of computational capability? And this application, let me just get rid of this guy, is called Fresh Paint. And course, everybody probably played with at some point in their life with one of the little painting programs. And all you were doing was essentially turning pixels on and off in some color. And what we wanted to do was say, could we actually build a full physics model of paint and painting or art? And in fact, we've done that. And so underpinning this is essentially a computationally intensive model. And so if I look at a file, and this is my paintings, at the launch the other day for Windows, we actually had one of these giant tablets set up. And what you have is essentially an easel. And if I touch away from this, so this is a painting that was painted on this tablet, or giant screen environment, by an artist in the Bellevue store in Washington the other day. And what's interesting is that this thing today supports oil paint, and the paint dries at the same time that it would if it was real paint. And so and you can erase things. Got this little fan down here. If you're an oil painter and you're in a hurry, you can basically turn the fan on, it'll dry faster. Really convenient. But the way the interface works is you have crayons, you have brushes. In fact, I brought with me a capacitive brush. And because the thing is capacitive and pressure sensitive, we actually can give artists real brushes to paint with. And the brushes can essentially be made different sizes, and you can do different colors. So if I wanted to create my own, for example, I'm not much of an artist, now I've got a completely new canvas. I could pick different paper colors. We actually model the texture of the surface of the paper. So as the brush or the pencil or whatever goes across it, it actually behaves the same way as it would it's a full physics simulation. So if I wanted to pick a color, if I was going to pick Cal colors, I'd want something blue like here, and I changed to blue. And if I wanted to paint, I can basically write Cal. And what's cooler is I'll say, hey, how about this? I want to get the other color, which is sort of like that, I guess. And I'll put that on a really small brush here of this style. And I'll keep it in the oil paint. And if I was really good now, I could basically outline Cal. But if I happen to touch it, you'll see that it actually blends the ink together. All right. And so, this really is a physics simulation of oil paint on paper. And, I'm personally, infatuated with this kind of thing because, I've given this to my 2-year-old grandkids, and they can essentially start to learn. And it's way cleaner than giving them real oil paint. Let me go on and show you other things that we're doing. For us, we expect more and more this world to be a multi-device world, and where the experiences that people want to engineer operate in this way. And for us, of course, business productivity applications are also equally important. And so if I start the OneNote notebook, which many of you may be familiar with, I've now got essentially a version of it here that zooms and scales and does all the appropriate things, just as you would, pinch and zoom all work with 2 hands or 2 fingers or whatever it might be. And, I can essentially scroll around in this. But if I wanted to pick part of this and zoom in on it, and I might want, this is actually the history of essentially the evolution of touch. This display was built by a company called Perceptive Pixels, which Microsoft acquired this year. And, they've really focused on this question of very natural interaction, where people, if you think about it, there's a test you should give yourself. Try to take a piece of paper out, put it on a flat surface, and write with just one hand. You'll find out it's incredibly difficult, that in fact people are continuously adjusting the paper with their other hand as they write. But today you can't do that on a computer, because most computers either only do touch or they might do pen. but they don't do touch and pen together. And in fact, there's a lot of very challenging problems like palm recognition and forearm recognition on these size screens that you have to figure out. But these guys have really focused on it, as have people at Microsoft for a decade. But now with the pen, you can say, well, back here in 2011, I had this capability. If I wanted to draw in a different color ink, I could make it thicker. I could say I wanted to highlight something. So I really wanted to talk to you about our acquisition of Perceptive Pixel. And now we're, for example, I say, super excited about the launch of the Surface. Now what's interesting is if I go over here, I've got one of the regular Surface devices. It's actually a Samsung tablet. And if I actually start OneNote on this thing, starts the same application. And with a little luck, when I get down here, I'll find out that all the things that I wrote over there have been annotated on here. Now, one thing I didn't show you, but this also has a recording feature. And if I had basically started and hit the recording button, everything I said would have been recorded. It would have been time synced to every keystroke that I gave you, as I drew on the thing. And when I came back over here, I could play it again. So we think that this kind of thing will turn out to be quite important in the future, for example, in an educational environment, because you all can actually not even be in the same place. You can see a lecture, you can see what happens, and it essentially will be synchronized to your own devices in the course of time. Another place where we're building these multi-screen experiences is a technology that Microsoft built called Smart Glass. Increasingly, we find that people, particularly people, I'll say your age, live in a world where they have access to game consoles and interactive televisions, plus their tablets and their cell phones. And increasingly, they don't just want to have one experience that they could use serially on different devices. For example, the way we've all done email for a long time. They want many devices to have this sort of synchronized type of interaction. And increasingly, they want to actually see the experience designed so that they can consume it across multiple devices at the same time. So last May, we introduced this smart glass concept and have now built it into the tablets, big and small, the phones, and the Xbox. So for example, if I go and start up the video player on this tablet, I can start to play a movie. And let's see, I'll play Snow White. And I watched part of it. I'll just say, resume this thing from where I was. Now, it starts playing the movie, which you can see from the camera over my head here. But if I actually flip up the controls in this environment, I can say play it on the Xbox. So it pauses the movie on this device, and that screen's now connected to an Xbox. And it basically moves it over there and resumes exactly at that point. Now what's more interesting is that now the experience on the tablet has been changed such that it basically will get information related to the movie. So now if you can see what's popped up on the tablet is profiles of the stars that are in the movie, an abstract of the movie. I have all the controls for the movie. I can even ask it to show me the different scenes for the movie. So what it does is when you start playing it, it'll actually scan the movie, find the individual scenes. I don't like that scene. Let me go to the next scene. And, but you can see by just touching, I can essentially change where it plays. And I have all the controls. So if I don't want to compete with her, I'll just pause her. Now next to this, you can actually see I also have one of the Windows phones. The phone actually has the same smart glass application. That's over here. And just as the dual pane version of the tablet, here on the smaller screen, the experience is designed to be optimal there. You still get the actors and the profile information, and you can still call up the scenes and navigate among them. And in fact, you can have all these things active at the same time. So more and more, we believe that whether it's for entertainment purposes or communication or collaboration in a business environment or a classroom environment, that the ability to design and operate these systems so that they span multiple devices will increasingly be important. All of this moves us in a direction, while this has all been if you will, still oriented around the graphical user interface. Obviously, one thing that people liked about the addition of touch or direct manipulation was there was something more natural about it, but you were still confined to the interface that was created for you by the person who wrote the application or created the basic graphical user interface model. And that's been super powerful and valuable, and it isn't going to go away. But 5 or 6 years ago, we became very focused at Microsoft on trying to think, what would it mean to make the computers more like us? To introduce what we think of as natural user interaction, where the same attributes that people have in terms of the ability to see and speak and listen and manipulate things would be used in order to create a new type of interaction with computers, one that would elevate the semantic level of interaction with the device and would really allow many, many more people over time to get a benefit from computing than currently do. And we've been very focused on that. And this ranges, and I'll show you more as time goes on today, across a very broad array of ideas of natural interaction. The first real product in this space for us was the Kinect on Xbox, where the business unit basically said, hey, our objective is to have controllerless gaming. We want people to be able to map themselves and the things that they know how to do in the physical world directly into the game. And of course, now we've applied that to the entertainment and control environment. And so a lot about NUI is emulating human senses, if you will. But other aspects really are sort of the design sense of thinking about applications in a way where you can just essentially sit down and do things that you didn't know how to do. So what I'm going to show you now is a demo called a LumaShare. This is not a product. It's actually a research prototype. But we built this in order to be able to see what it's like when you can give people a almost completely natural ability to collaborate at a distance. So Matt, you want to come up here? Matt works with me, and he'll just sit on the other one of these tables. What you have here is a thing that, for all intents and purposes, looks like a desk lamp and a tablet. And what's on the tablet is essentially a Skype call. So I can talk and see Matt sitting at the other side there. But this is a very fancy desk lamp in that it's designed in a way where sort of in interleaving frames, it can project and it can see. And excuse me, what that gives us the ability to do is to create a composite image on each desk that is half what you physically have in front of you and half what you observe on the other side. So he just took his pen and set it down, and it shows up here. Now, I've just got a video of it. He's got the real object, but I got the red pen, and I can put it here and do the same thing. And so, I can take this thing and say, hey, let's say I was trying to, teach somebody, geometry or something. I say, well, look, I'm going to draw this nice triangle here. And as I draw it, it'll show up on his, too. And I can say, hey, tell me about this. Teach me about angles. And so he can take out his protractor. He can measure these things. He can say, OK, well, that one's 30 degrees. And, well, that one, let me guess, looks like 90. I know, it's been a long time, but I did get that. And so he said, OK, well, what's that one going to be? And I can say, well, no, I don't think it's 65 because there's this rule that they have to add up to 180. So, I can say this is really 60. And so we've basically put young kids down in front of this with literally no training. You can give them books, magazines, crayons, games, physical toys and that kind of stuff. And in a matter of seconds, they just start playing with each other because they can see them, they can talk to them, they can manipulate these things, and they basically have, for all intents and purposes, the ability to operate on what appears to be the physical world at the same time, even though they're not in the same place. So we think of this as essentially, telepresent collaboration. And while this is essentially a version that'll be, I think, employed in a work environment or maybe just for kids who want to communicate and play, this can be really, really cheap, the lamp, in that it has a very, very simple camera in it. It has a pico projector in it, and a small amount of intelligent circuitry that knows how to interleave these images. And so our view is that in the future, people will buy furniture for their office or furniture for their kids to do their homework on, and they'll think nothing of being able to collaborate, not just by saying, hey, I can make a phone call or I can have a Skype call, but rather I will be able to really show people things, demonstrate things, measure things, move things. We think this is going to be important. There's a big effort in the company at all scales of thinking about this idea of telepresent collaboration. And I think it's going to be one of the more important things that we ultimately will master how to do. Beyond NUI, another big trend nowadays, you can certainly even read airport ads about it, or TV ads, is what people call big data. And say, hey, what is big data? And my definition of big data is it's data sets that are so large that in practice you can't operate on them on a single machine, no matter how big that one machine is. The data sets are just too big to do anything interesting on that machine. And so there's been a big activity at Microsoft to think about, how do you give people better tools to support analytics. And I really think of this as two different classes of ultimately tools. One set is where, much as we have for many years with powerful visualization tools and analytic tools, you're trying to couple the human intellect and their intuition, or perhaps domain knowledge, into trying to develop some new insight. And the human really has to master the tool and drive it around in the data. This will remain very important, but ultimately I think will be superseded or augmented in a dramatic way by the next topic I'll talk about too, which is machine learning. But first, let me give you a demonstration of some of the advances that are being made in the tools for this sort of big data and the analytics around it. What you see up here is a screenshot. This is essentially down at the Monterey Bay Institute. They are doing a lot of work on studying the oceans, obviously, and in particular in Monterey Bay. And the left is a floating buoy that has all kinds of instrumentation built into it. And on the top right is an autonomous underwater vehicle, and that can be programmed to work in conjunction with this floating guy. On the bottom right is a picture of one of the instruments, which actually does, using laser light, it can in real time do measurement of chlorophyll in the water, for example, or even do RNA type analysis. And so what I'll show you now is some tools that we've built lately. These are derived from a thing that we did out of research at Microsoft a few years ago. It was called the Worldwide Telescope. There was one of the first examples of a lot of really big data, which was essentially all of the astronomy community's collected images, observations, and measurements, of everything in the sky. And we set out to create a tool where people could ingest all of those things and essentially in real time manipulate them, examine them, zoom in on them, and importantly make stories, to be able to share their observations and explorations with other people. So we went on with the product group to basically make this new thing, which is called Layerscape. And it takes the same idea of being able to build interactive stories and time-based sequences around big data. In this case, it's not astronomy images, it's just other types of data. So I'm just going to jump into what is a pre-recorded sequence of activities that were built using this tool now. And this has actually been released by Microsoft. So if I just touch this, and it'll continue. The first thing you see here is a trace over time of that thing floating in the Monterey Bay and sampling chlorophyll at a depth of about 10 meters. And the chlorophyll intensity is reflected in the colors on this. And now if you want to basically try to understand, well, what's going on here, why might this change, the next thing that they do is they basically rotate it around and they overlay satellite measurement of surface chlorophyll. And so now you see these composited, and you can see where this thing floated around and what the other observations show. And you can see that it turns out that new water kind of flows up at this part of Monterey Bay. The currents basically flow this way. That's why the buoy actually follows in this path. And then there was sort of older, colder water, that was over here. And if I go on and want to understand, how to correlate, chlorophyll at different layers, then you want to bring in a new layer of data. In this case, this thing called the tethys was the name of the torpedo-like thing up there. And what it does is it's programmed to swim around the buoy. And they call it porpoising. It basically goes up to the surface and then swims down to 100 meters and up and back again, and it goes around and around. And what it's trying to do is essentially to produce a correlatable set of data at every point with what the buoy is able to measure. And here, of course, I could do the same kind of zooming and panning if I wanted to. But if you look at this graph, this is what you would historically have been presented with as a scientist for the output of the tethys system. So you'd get a time sweep of the data. You'd have colored dots for depth, salinity, and chlorophyll. And you'd spend your evenings staring at the dots, trying to figure out what did they mean. It turns out it's a lot easier to figure out what they mean if you can look at them in a time sequence. So you can sort of wind this thing back to the beginning. And then to essentially plot it in a completely different way, where you've now grouped things into colored bands, which represent each of the circles that the thing had as it sorted around, as it swam around in this environment. Excuse me. And so, in this environment, I could zoom in on it. I could, kind of conclude that there are some anomalies in this data. Normally, you'd expect, for example, that if green was the lightest and blue was the middle and red was the bottom, you'd expect that the layers would always be that way. It turns out when you look at it graphically this way, you can find out, no, in fact, there are anomalies in this environment, that occasionally you get layering, and you might want to go figure out why that was the case. So this is just an example of very powerful new tools that are being developed. So people who have domain knowledge have a much richer way to try to gain insight from the data. But I think at Microsoft, the thing that we've been doing research on for almost 20 years, and I think is now really coming of age, is this concept we call machine learning. And we've been using it for some years at Microsoft already inside the company to solve problems. And increasingly, we'll make these tools available to people outside, much as we have the kind of analytic tools that I just showed you. But to give you an idea of the dynamic range of the applications of these machine learning technologies, I've picked just 6 things that we do with it today. One thing we do is speech recognition. And in fact, almost everything that we do now about speech and language learning, the ability for the machine to see and read, all is done by essentially learning, not by programmers being able to describe this. This is a very fundamental trend, and you'll see as this goes on that more and more people whose job is to write programs are no longer, by and large, writing programs whose output is completely predictable. In the simple sense, if you go back, people said, oh, I know, programs are algorithms and data. You take some fixed set of data, you apply some algorithm, you get some answer, and the job of the programmer was to figure out, what that algorithm should be. But increasingly, the things that we do are not so predictable. That what the programmer's doing is harnessing these superscale engines together that are really operating on a more statistical level, not on a completely predictable level. Now, this poses all kinds of new challenges to the programmer in terms of deciding what's correct and what isn't correct. How do you debug these kind of things? This is a problem both at the platform level and ultimately at the application level. But it's our belief that the things that really are going to make computing both easier for people to use and ultimately to have it produce more interesting and useful results are now going to be predominantly determined by your ability to master these superscale machine learning techniques. The second one we did, this was quite a few years ago, when we introduced Xbox, we introduced Xbox Live, which was a gaming service. And the idea was we wanted to allow people to play games together who weren't physically at the same console. And one of the things that turns out to be a challenge in any gaming environment is how do you match people? You know, you've got 60 or 100 million people who are playing games. They play different kinds of games at different skill levels. And when they show up in the game line and says, hey, I'm ready to play a game, who do you match them up with? And it's very hard because the games span such a wide genre, set of genres, and you know, it's very hard to describe what constitutes excellence, you know, or high skill in any particular game. So what we did is we applied machine learning and created a thing we called true skill, which for each game, by observation, would figure out what skills could be observed in people who had the highest scores. And by observing those things and measuring them, you were able to essentially not just give the sort of points for winning the game, but you could basically come up with a profile of different aspects of the skill of an individual player on an individual game, and then use that to match people up. And this produces a very satisfying gaming experience because, in fact, you can make it such that people are so evenly matched that you can't actually reliably predict who will win. And of course, that is the ultimate, you know, thing that you want in a gaming environment. You don't want to always get creamed by, you know, the person you're playing. That's just no fun at all. And so this, you know, is an example of very subtle ways you start to see this applied. The whole concept of building super-scale search engines like Bing couldn't be done without machine learning. And even the monetization system, like what ad should be presented to somebody in 30 milliseconds, you know, based on their current activity and history, that's also a machine learning-driven system. Years ago, we started, you know, with this issue of having to filter mail and instant messaging around spam. And in a minute, I'll show you a video that shows how this whole concept of filtering has become important in other areas. When we introduced Connect, where the goal was to have the ability to have controllerless gaming, what we had to do was figure out how the machine could recognize people very quickly, map them into a skeletal position, and then return that description to the game designer. And so we developed the algorithms that would do the skeletal mapping. We can do 4 people, 42 major joints at 30 hertz simultaneously, using just a tiny fraction of the power of the game console. It turns out the challenge then becomes, how in the world do you actually describe the gesture that is meaningful to you in the game you're writing? So let's say you wanted to make a handball game. So what you have to really do is figure out how to describe how you swat the ball back. And you might swat with your right hand, you might swat with your left hand. But it turned out in the first generation, it took really skilled people about 200 hours per gesture to figure out how to describe the translation of all the skeletal joints to reflect what was considered a swat and what wasn't. Because in fact, you know, it could be here, it could be here, it could be there. A human, you look at them, you say, hey, is that a swat? And they say, yeah. You know, but how do you tell the machine how do you describe that? So because we wanted more and more people to be able to build more and more things, not just games, but now many applications that connect, we built a machine learning system that makes it brain dead simple for anybody to teach a gesture. And literally what you do is you stand in front of the thing, you start the record thing, you make a few swats that you consider representative of a thing you want, and you make a few gestures like a kick or, you know, you turn yourself around, anything that is not a swat. And then like a home movie editor, you just put little brackets around the things that you believe are representative of the SWAT, and you feed it into the thing. And in about 60 seconds, it analyzes it all and comes out with a canonical description of a SWAT in terms of, you know, the simultaneous deflection of all the joints. And so, you know, these things look easy, they're very difficult, and only using these techniques can we make it possible for most people to do. Another one is if you look at all the mapping stuff we do in Bing and for the phones and tablets and other devices, we wanted to be able to predict traffic. Because when you ask for a route, it turns out, unless it's a very short route, based on the time of day and other events, you know, the traffic may be very different when you get to a particular point than it is when you leave. And so years ago, we started and now built a machine learning system that ingests all these different factors in every locale, along with the current measured properties of traffic, and it'll actually predict over the duration of your trip, what the predicted traffic is going to be at each point, and then builds a route based on that prediction. So these are just 6 examples of that. Let me just run a video for you that highlights the work of David Heckerman. He's a longtime Microsoft researcher. In fact, as he states in the video, his original work was in spam filtering, but he's also trained as a physician. And a few years ago, he decided, he really wanted to see if these techniques could be applied in the hunt for an AIDS vaccine. So let's watch this video.
The first time I came to South Africa, I was completely unprepared. I had no idea of the extent of the epidemic. It was staggering.
Every year, 1.8 million people die of HIV, and if you do the math, that's 5,000 people a day. Before I started working on HIV, I was working on spam filtering. I actually invented the spam filter. The first thing that happened when we invented the spam filter was that spammers started working around our filter.
One of the problems with HIV is that it's continuously evolving.
When I came to HIV, it was sort of the same thing. We had our immune systems like a spam filter trying to block HIV, and then HIV mutating to get around the immune system. So we had the idea, let's do the same thing. Let's go after the Achilles heel of HIV.
My name is Purity. I live in South Africa.
In this particular part of South Africa, among young women, the infection rates go from less than 1% at age 15 to almost 2/3 of the women being infected by the age of 22 or 23.
I thought my life was over. Usually, people told us that if you're HIV positive, you're dead.
So first of all, we want to find out where our immune system is attacking HIV. And we do this with a program that we've developed called PhyloD. And so what we're doing is cataloging these fragments of HIV that are vulnerable to attack by the immune system.
There's so much data being generated that it requires massive computing power.
If you were to do these computations on a single machine, it would take years. But at Microsoft, we have thousands of machines that can work in parallel to get the job done, and we do it in a matter of hours.
So when David sent me the results of his computations in an Excel sheet, it has reduced this huge data set to 20 significant observations. So I now know where to start with my research in the lab. I think the beauty of that collaboration is that he has this knowledge and can adapt the programs as we need them.
If somebody was able to create a vaccine, I think that will be great for the whole world. Yeah.
So I've done a lot of collaborations in my life, but this one with HIV is very special.
I firmly believe this is a solvable problem, and I and many other people have devoted our careers to this, and we're going to continue working on it until we succeed.
I think of this as a precursor to the kinds of techniques are going to have to be employed, not just to find a vaccine for AIDS, but to ultimately move the world completely to sort of the world of digital biology and digital medicine. And today, we've basically taken this kind of stuff in Microsoft Research and put it into the Azure cloud platform to get the ability to scale it up and have other people access it. This space requires a lot of focus on parallel computing, but not in the conventional computational modeling, but in essentially this big data handling capability. It requires that you be able to take and annotate and understand things like genomic data and the genome of the virus. And then there's many different machine learning algorithms that have to be developed and employed in order to be able to get these insights. But ultimately, I think this is just one tiny example, and I think all of the world of medicine and pretty much every field of science and engineering and even sociology will no longer be able to be progressed without the use of these big data and machine learning capabilities. And so I think that's an essential feature of the use of computers in the future. So let me close with just a few thoughts about how we're moving to use these combinations of big data, everything we can observe about people and their interactions, the data sets that we have to process, and this goal for natural interaction, to really make computers that are more like us. In this environment, we've made some progress. I mean, clearly Connect was a major step forward. It got a very strong global reception simply because it really was the first system where people could do otherwise complex tasks, like put yourself into a 3D game with no prior training and be able to operate in that environment. Why? We already knew how to operate in the real world. You just didn't have a way to translate what your brain and body knew into actions that were meaningful in the game. And Connect showed us a way to begin to do that. And now we're applying it in many other areas. So if you look at the next slide, I've annotated what looks like just the average. I want to sit in my living room and talk to my Xbox. With the sort of the next class of problems that we're trying to solve, now that we've been able to endow the television through its Xbox interfaces and computational capability and the cloud behind it, with all these things. We do the skeletal tracking, but of course we'd like to be able to not just do the 42 major joints, we'd like to be able to do finer grain tracking, including all your fingers and things. But that turns out to also be a physics and an optics problem, as well as a machine learning problem. We want to recognize people. We do a limited amount of that today, so that when you walk into the room, you just log in because the device recognizes you. But ultimately, there's lots of other benefit to doing it. But to be able to do it reliably and quickly, particularly in low light situations, all these represent interesting challenges. When you're not playing games, you're watching movies. There's no very low ambient light, and yet you want to reliably be able to identify people. All different kinds of gesture recognition. I talked about skill matching. We want to be able to do content recommendations. Today we can do a good job serving up ads for people against search queries, but the world doesn't do a very good job of trying to really recommend content. In a world where video entertainment is essentially everything that you'll be able to stream off the web, any classical concept of navigating through a guide is just completely implausible. And so a lot of our focus now is to be able to apply the search engine capability to the content environment through a verbal or gesture-based interface and be able to get that on your Xbox. And in fact, we do that in the latest version of the product today. I'll close by just showing you one more short video. Let me show you the slide first. So this is Rick Rashid. Rick works for me and is the founder of Microsoft Research 21 years ago. And we collaborated together for 20 years at Microsoft and across a wide range of things. And in recent years, a lot of our focus has been to try to create an optimal impedance match between the basic science that we do in MSR and the needs of the product group. But we also, at times, seek to challenge the researchers, particularly to collaborate more. This question of collaboration, and the ability for multidisciplinary cooperation to solve really hard problems is going to be an essential requirement for people in the future. It's a bit like medicine today. General practitioners are largely going away because medicine's just become too complicated. And so you become more and more specialized. The same is going to happen in all of our disciplines. And therefore, the premium on being able to function as a team in order to solve problems will be higher and higher. So every so often, we give a set of challenges, if you will, our own little internal grand challenges to the Microsoft Research Labs. and one that Rick gave them and emphasized 2 years ago. We call them impossible thing initiatives because at the time they sort of seem impossible, was to complete the ability for real-time speech translation, which is not just, can I say something and have it done? The challenge was a little higher. We wanted it to translate your spoken word into your native language in text, which allows a level of verification, to basically convert the text, into the corresponding output language, to synthesize also the spoken word for that target language, and to synthesize the speech in a physical vocoder model of your voice, so that it is exactly as if you spoke the other language, not heard another person speaking the other language. So this has been a goal we've had for a while, and so last week was really not only important for us at the company because of Windows 8 and all these other things, but last week we actually achieved this goal. And at the 21st Century Computing Conference in China, Rick, for the first time, gave a public demonstration of this. And so this is from the audience, just a little video clip, but I'll show you, how this has progressed. And of course, everything I've talked about, big data, machine learning, natural interaction, all of that is essentially underpinning this ultimate goal of sort of Star Trek-y, of you speak in one language and you're heard in a different language. Go ahead and run the video.
There's much work to be done in this area. 在这方面有很多工作要做。 But this technology is very promising. 用这个技术很有希望。And we hope in a few years that we'll be able to break down the language barriers between people. 数年后，我们希望能够打破人们之间的语言障碍。 Personally, I believe this is going to lead to a better world. 这我个人认为，这将导致更好的世界。
As far as I know, this has never been done before. It's quite an achievement, a technical tour de force, I think. There are very few things that I consider as seminal demonstrations in computing as this is. And yet I think of it as just the beginning of a completely new era of computing and how it will evolve.